So this is a tutorial just covering one method of sketching. There's lots of different methods of sketching and lots of different ways, and I don't believe that there's any one best way. It's whatever works for you. But this particular method of sketching I've used for a long time. Sometimes it has its problems and sometimes it has its downfalls, but it's quite a good way of getting accurate sketches and to construct drawings in an effective way. Like I say, it's not the best way. Some people might look at this and go, no, that's not the way you do it. That's fine, but this is, just one way of doing it that works quite well for me. So what I've done is I've done a video of myself drawing a toy elephant. I've just got this toy which I've put, like 30-40 centimeters in front of me, and I've just been sketching it. And I'll show you what it looks like in here. So it's a really rough photo of it there, really blurry for some reason. All the focus went on the background stuff. And what I've done is I've videoed myself actually looking at it. So this is quite an important part of this. I've videoed my left eye, and the reason I've done that is because sometimes what I've found is that people leave it too long. When I've been watching people doing life drawing, they leave it too long between looking at the drawing and then sketching. So I wanted to show the rate at which I look up and down as I'm sketching, and even times when I'm just looking up and down and I'm not actually sketching at all. So you can just get a look at the frequency, the speed at which, and the number of times I'll look up and down and how quickly I do it. What happens is when you sketch and when you look at stuff, for instance this elephant, every time you look at it, every time you glance, that visual memory disappears. So you look up and it disappears, but just for a fleeting glimpse, for sort of half a second or so, it stays in your memory. So you imagine that if you look at something and you take a snapshot which fades, and it's fading each time you look up, you notice when I draw stuff, and I'll press play on this. Let's have a look. And I'm just looking around for a bit there. Let's have a look. Okay. So you can see there I'm looking up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And as I do that, every time I look up and down, I'm taking this snapshot. So up, down, up, down, up, down. And I'm aware that I have to refresh the image in my mind to make sure that it's accurate each time. I'm also doing a comparison, so I'm looking at the sketch on the paper and I'm quickly looking up at the thing I'm drawing and then back down again, and I'm looking each time really quickly, like a spot the difference drawing or a spot the difference image, and I'm trying to match it together, seeing if there's any shapes and things that don't work, that aren't being drawn properly. And what I tend to do is I tend to break things down into shapes. So I tend to break things down into shapes. So what I mean by that is I'll look at the photo here, and I don't really care about what things are. They don't exist really. Legs, arms, ears, even though an elephant doesn't have arms obviously. I'm not concerned about each different part of the elephant and drawing each different part. So I won't draw a leg and then another leg and then its body and then its ears. I don't really care about that. What I care about are its individual shapes, both the elephant itself and the negative shapes. I don't care really about drawing the elephant, I just care about the shapes that it has, and both negative and positive shapes. By negative and positive I mean a positive shape would be the shape of, say, this leg here, and as it comes round, that shape there. But I would also mean negative shape. So I'm talking about this shape, which is really quite a distinctive shape, which is the space between the leg and the trunk, that shape there. So that's what we call negative space. Also using reference parts, so say there's this bit here and then there's this nice straight line across there. I can use that shape to build up the picture of the elephant. So I would be looking to break this elephant down into individual shapes, not concerning myself with what those shapes mean and what they are, and I would break them down as if I'm looking at, say, countries on a map, say a map of Europe or the map of the US. If you imagine drawing a map of Europe, you don't really care what France looks like, you're just trying to get the shape right. And this is what I'm trying to do here. So my kind of tactic with this was I started drawing this negative shape in here, round this way. That was what I was really interested to start with. And it's a very distinctive shape, and it's just like trying to crawl your way across a rock face. You try and get a good foothold. So I drew that particular shape in there. You see here, I drew that to get this really definite distinctive shape in. And then after I did that, I crawled across and I looked at this shape in here, and then I looked at this negative shape in here. So I started with a negative shape, and then I went into a positive shape, and then a negative shape. And you can see that in the video here. So I've got a negative, sort of with this negative shape in there. I think I drew in this particular bit in here as well because that was handy. Drew the leg in there, filled in the toes, you know, just for reference purposes. And I filled in this negative shape here, made a bit of a mistake, so I drew back. And then had a look at this part here was coming up. I was interested in kind of building up this overall shape. So what I'm trying to do is, if I break this down, I've got one shape there, another shape in there, and another shape in there. And you see the frequency at which I'm looking up and down. So I'm going up, down, and I'm always doing a comparison. Sometimes I'll stop drawing and I'll just simply do a comparison between what I have on the page and what I see in front of me, just to see if anything's going a bit weird, going a bit different. So I'll just pause that. So the other things that I'm looking at to make these shapes are I'm doing things like I'm having a look at, say, comparative heights. So say I start to, you know, I've drawn this part here. Whoops, I'll do a better job of that. I've come down here. What I'm going to try and do is this distinctive kind of, if you imagine this as being a map and this is like a bay in here, what I want to do is to say, well, whereabouts do I come back out and round? One of the things I do is I'll draw an imaginary line across. From the bottom of this is a landmark that I've created. So just imagine this is like a map. So I've created this landmark here, and I'll say, okay, if I draw a line straight across there, the end of this kink here is about where this line intersects. So I'm looking at the intersects of where, you know, if I was to carry lines across, I look at where they would intersect with another feature. So again, say I've drawn, I drew this bit here because it's quite distinctive. And when I got round to this part here, I noticed that if I was to draw a line from this point here straight across, it would come to the bottom of the foot. So it's quite a good indicator. And again, I'd have a look at, say, where the middle of this part is. I would draw an imaginary line straight up and say, well, it comes roughly between here and here. So all the time I'm creating these imaginary lines, doing little comparisons, saying, okay, where this bit ends and the end point of this bit, if I draw straight up, I'll hit this point here. So I try and find, just like you would if you're walking across a landscape, I try and find distinctive parts that I can reference against the entire time. So as you'll see from, let's have a look, the video, I carry on across there and I fill in. So I've got more shapes coming in here. I'm looking at negative and positive shape. Now one of the dangers is you can come across, you can draw this really long going right off into the right hand side. The reason I start from bottom left to right is because naturally when you draw, if you were to draw from the right hand side down to the left, your hand would be covering what you're drawing. It makes it really difficult. So I always start in the bottom left and then I reveal as I come across. One of the dangers is you can start drawing out to here and then find this great big long, like as if you've sort of gone on this journey. You might find this is too stretched and I may have gone a little too far. So what I have to do is then go back to this and say, right, well, okay, if I've, say, from here to here, I can take a pencil and hold it, and I can say, well, roughly, if I do that, then from there to there is about the same distance. So I'm trying to find lots of comparative distances, taking a pencil and saying, okay, from there to there is that long. So if I've drawn this correctly, and I can measure that bit at 2 if I want to, if this is correct, this foot will end just about here, slightly over. So there's loads of little parts on this elephant where you'll be able to do little comparisons and be able to compare lengths and height. And you can also do this the other way as well. You can turn this on its side, and you can put your, measure either with a piece of card and your thumb on a piece of card, and you can say, okay, well, that distance there is roughly, let's say, the top of the head to the middle of the knee here. If I've got this is that long, then from there to there will take me to the top of the head. So I'm trying to find lots of little places that I can create little footholds in and be able to compare distances. Constantly compare distance. That's the really important thing. Creating shape and then re-examine all the time. So use your intuition to get these shapes, and then use mathematics to go back and check them to make sure that they're correct. Another thing that I tend to do as well is maybe kind of extrapolate. So when you've got quite a distant part now, like I had one over here, and it was at this point here, and I wanted to get this full shape in because I need to fill this out. What I was trying to do is I had a look at some areas where I can kind of draw imaginary diagonals. So if I imagine that, say, this shape here, although there's no line there, there is a line in there. So I can create that. And what I do is I say, well, if I had a point there and I was to draw a straight line to the top of this bit, what angle would that be? So when I drew this bit, let's have a look, how's it gone? When I drew this bit here, you'll notice that I drew in a little line there, I drew in a little edge line in there to kind of imagine that if I carried from this point to that point and I drew a line at that angle, I would reach there. So I often do kind of imaginary diagonal lines across. Or I might sort of say, okay, if I've got the ear in the correct place, the tip of the ear here, I might say, well, what would the angle be if I've drawn the kind of pit of the leg there? What angle would the line be to hit the tip of the ear? About there. That would be that angle. And I know that if I've drawn the ear in the wrong place, if I've drawn it like here, and I do this angle will be too steep. And I'll notice that these angles are too steep. So constantly checking, you have to go backwards and forwards and keep checking that the angles that you've put in and the shapes that you've created are correct. So I'll just create, and basically it's building things up by shape. A lot of people will say, and now one of the other things is anything qualifies as shape. So shadow, if it's a definite shape in there, this qualifies as shape. Highlight can qualify as shape. This sort of crook bit in here on the side by the temple qualifies as shape. Any distinct area of dark and light, as long as it's not too fuzzy. If it is a little bit fuzzy, what I tend to do is kind of roughly put it in. So I'll draw a really thin line about it. Just to indicate that there is something there, where it gets a bit fuzzy in there. If I haven't got much to cling on to, if I haven't got much reference, sometimes I'll draw out the less defined bits of shape. But in here, there's loads of shape that I can have a look at and create. And you have to look at the negative as well as the positive shape. So I have to look at these negative shapes in here, this one in here. So what I would do is, if you're going to do some drawing, if you want to try this particular method, build it up, break stuff down and build it up. So break it down into its individual shapes. Imagine it's like a map of the US states, or the states of Africa, or the states of Europe. And imagine you're drawing it country by country and going through. And then as you draw each of these shapes, go back and measure them and make sure that, if, like I was saying before, if this distance here needs to be the same as this distance here, going back and measuring and saying, okay, well if this is this big, then this must be that big. And also, you sometimes, as I was saying, looking at the angles, saying, well, if I was to draw a line from the pit of the front leg to the ear, it would be that angle there. And keep checking all the time. It's all about checking. Some of that checking is by stopping drawing and just looking up and down a lot and going, is that right? Is it? Is it? You know, things like this pit here, again to that corner of the ear there. That's roughly the angle that I was thinking it would be at. You can see where I've really roughly drawn in the light and dark here, where it's not so well defined. But I've also covered like these negative spaces as well. This line coming across here roughly hits the line at the back there between the tail and the back leg. You know, that's another one. If that had gone out of sync and this line was way down here or way up there, I know that I've gone wrong somewhere. So as I've moved on, I've built up these shapes and I've gradually created it, made corrections, and I've built up my elephant that way. It's not the best sketch in the world, but you can sort of see how I've kind of crawled across and built it up and then started to shade it in there. It gets pretty sketchy, but you can see, and I've made a few corrections, moved the head up and things as I've gone along, and it's really about just taking this and you know, and just becoming accustomed to it. And working fast, work quick. The other thing that happens is that you have this visual memory of the way things should be and the way things actually. It's a battle between the way things should be and the way things are. So often we will say, well, hand will look like this. So let's say we have a hand and we've got fingers and we've got, you know, the archetypal hand, which is a terrible drawing of a hand. But a hand never really looks like that. Well, not like that hand anyway. But that's often the thing that we've got in our imagination. That's how hands should look. But then there's the way things actually do look. And that is just purely based on shape and looking at different shapes and breaking it down. So all I do is suggest that if you draw your hand, forget the fingers, forget thumbs and forget palms, and just simply look at, if you were to build up the shapes and say break it down into individual parts, how would you go about, you know, breaking down that hand into individual bits? And you can see I'm going to very roughly and probably quite badly sketch out a hand here, and you probably won't see what it is. You may never see what it is if it's that bad. Until it starts to really come together. And so I'm breaking things down into the individual shapes there. I'm looking at the distinctive shapes of all the different parts, the lines that are coming out, doing little comparisons here. And I'm just going to draw, just looking at negative space, like the negative space in there between the index and the forefinger there. And looking at the individual lines and just breaking this down in here. I'm just constantly looking up and down and just doing little comparisons. So this is very rough, but hopefully you'll get the idea. Using a nail there as a comparison, as a different shape. And then I'm just going to build these shapes in. So let's have a look. So I've got a thumbnail, bottom of the thumbnail there, and there's another shape that comes out bottom of here. And I can just patch in another shape in here, and then out of that I start to get my middle finger in there, and then another finger coming out here. So I'm just kind of breaking this down into individual parts here. Some would say quite badly. So hopefully you get the general gist of it. So I think I need to make some changes to this. Make this a bit longer, a bit better. But you can see the general idea of how I'm just going about just breaking it down and building up individual bits and pieces. And I'm not really thinking about, you know, what is a finger, what is a forefinger, what is where's the thumb and stuff like that. I'm just kind of going, right, well what's this shape here? You know, where does this line go? Where does it intersect here? And that's the way I'm kind of putting this together. Yeah, that's pretty horrible, but you know, it'll kind of do for now. Making little corrections as you go as well, because that's pretty bad. So your left hand, or your right hand if you're left-handed, is a really good way of already just a good way of making a start and learning to break things down into different shapes. And that's probably one of the best things you can start with, to be honest. So you can see from that very rough example, that's pretty much how I'm putting this together and how I'm creating this sketching system. It may work for you, it may not, but give it a try, and if it doesn't, then keep trying with other methods and see what works for you. But definitely breaking things down into shapes is one way just to simplify things, just make them less complicated.